All right, and we're live. Starting to see some viewers trickle in, so we'll just give another couple of seconds and then we'll get started. For anyone who's joining us for the action replay, you can probably fast forward the first few seconds of this as we wait for the viewers to join the live feed. I think we can probably start off with some introductions. So thanks everyone for joining us. We're starting our panel today, this evening over where I am today for probably most of the viewers. Is titled So You Want to Be a Cannabis Mogul. And I think it's pretty obvious from that title is that we're speaking to cannabis businesses really across the space and across the world, but we're going to be focusing on what's going on in North America and in the United States specifically today. And we're going to kind of focus on the positive and the negative. So the steps that you need in order to run a successful cannabis business, and also the hurdles or the pitfalls that you're likely to run into, and hopefully we'll give you some really actionable ways to get through those. So I'm very excited about the panel that I have with me right now. I'll just do a quick round of introductions, and then I'll let each of you introduce yourselves to the audience a bit more as you start kind of digging into the questions that we're answering today. So we have Jim Valenzuela, who is the founder and CEO of Oro HR and Oro Leaf HR. Jim, you can just give a little wave so everyone knows who you are. Oh, you do have your name there as well. And then we have Chris Davis, who is the Executive Director of the International Cannabis Bar Association. Lisa Buffo, the founder and CEO of the Cannabis Marketing Association. And Ted Lichtenberger, I hope I said your name right there, Ted, the co-founder of Flower Company. So first of all, thank you all very much for joining me. Really excited to have you here. And I think what we've got here tonight is a panel today, wherever you are, whatever time it is a panel that covers a whole lot of the areas which can be particularly challenging when it comes to running a cannabis business. And Ted here is here to kind of represent the cannabis business owner. Having said that, if you have any questions that come to you while you're watching, please feel free to put them in the comments. We'll answer the questions. We'll take a chunk of time at the end, about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the session to answer your questions, but you can start shooting them in as they come up and we'll be able to answer those. So we're going to get straight into it. I want Ted, for you to start us off here, just telling us a bit about your experience as a cannabis business owner, and specifically in terms of operating in the legal market while still competing with the illicit market.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here today, and thank you for the introduction. I think it'd be useful for me to give like a short little snapshot of how I got to be here in the industry, because it gives a lot of context to the question, and then I can jump into the way that you have to consider the illicit market. But I got into the cannabis industry a little over 5 years ago. Before that, I worked at McKinsey in consulting. I'd advised big companies on how to operate. And after doing that for a few years, I really wanted to get back into starting companies. And I got super lucky. I knew I wasn't an expert on the industry, but I'd been a consumer for a while, like many of you probably are. And I knew I needed to meet people who knew more than me about the space. So I reached out to everybody I knew, and I got hooked up with a cultivator out of Humboldt County, as well as a criminal defense attorney from up there. And that's, the traditional weed basket for America. And basically they brought me, into the family, so to speak. This was before the industry was really regulated in California. And I started to be able to participate in the medical industry. And I saw, as we went from 2016, which was kind of Wild West, to 2018, where we started having more regulations in California, that the unregulated industry, the illicit market, didn't go away the way that we all expected it to. I actually started, I worked with them to build a brand that celebrated Humboldt cultivators called Humboldt Legends, but by 2018 realized I could do a lot more with my supply chain. And I actually started 2 companies, which was crazy. I wouldn't do it again. One of them is called Old Pal, which is like the PBR of cannabis, biggest mass market brand in California for kind of basic weed. And the other is Flower Company, which is kind of like the Amazon for cannabis, best prices, with the biggest selection, I think, in the world for cannabis products, over 1,400 products on our menu, 140 brands at any time. So while I was launching those in 2018, we saw prices in the wholesale market just plummet because everyone thought the regulators are coming, things are going to be forced to stay in state. We're not going to, we're going to have so much supply because California is supplied everywhere else in the country, and it's going to be stuck here. And so prices went from, $700-800 a pound down to like $200 or $300 a pound for like bulk volume and lower grade product. And what we ended up seeing after that, like that kind of collapse, was that everyone realized, wait a second, the regulators aren't watching as much as we thought. And the illicit market, while it had kind of compressed a little bit, started to rebound. And I think that's really important because, at the end of the day, cannabis has other substitutes. Regulated cannabis has other substitutes, whether it's the person who's growing at home, Chris and I were talking before this call about his like little home grow cultivation, or people who are buying from friends of a friend who has like a cultivator friend in California. Whether you're in a market like California where the regulations didn't really clamp down as tightly as people expected, or you're in a market that has really tight regulation, there's still going to be people bringing weed illicitly into that place. And when you start to just look at the numbers and you're going into a new market, you're making your new business plan in the cannabis industry, you might say, oh, well, given how many people live in this place and how much cultivation is coming online, there's going to be an oversupply, and so prices should go down and we should be able to make this sort of business model make sense. And if you think of it all in one, like you're in a vacuum, you're just in that one regulated market, you're not actually going to consider all the options that the customers have. And so, people end up choosing to go to the friend of a friend or an illegal shop because the taxes are much lower, or the product can be more fresh because they don't have the same regulatory controls on the supply chain. So, I think I've changed a lot in the last 5 years in terms of recognizing how big of a driver it is on demand. Even just seasonally throughout the year, you see it as the illicit market runs out of bulk supply, demand in the regulated market goes up. So kind of towards the drier time of year, like right now, like April, May, June, it's not just the 420 month that drives demand. You actually have demand increase because there's less supply in the illicit kind of wholesale pools. And the inverse happens in the fall. And so you might think, oh man, I'm doing such a good business. My growth month over month looks awesome right now. But really, you're just serving the same customer base and they're buying more from you because their dealer friend doesn't have as much of the product. So I guess, just to kind of summarize, don't think about your business as being in a vacuum, and try to consider how someone in the illicit market could be a substitute. But also think about how if you beat the illicit market, how much of a volume of supply of demand you could harness, because there's so many people that are still buying in that market. And it's a huge opportunity, even if it feels like all of the big opportunities in the industry have been addressed, or, the kind of cat's out of the bag and the industry is already kind of going. We're still super early in it. And if you recognize that the illicit market is still a big place that we need to, penetrate and bring into the regulated market, you can probably find some interesting opportunities.
Thanks for that, Ted. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think it's, probably relevant for some cannabis businesses more than other cannabis businesses, which is a really good moment for me to ask anyone who's viewing, if you can share in the comments what it is that you're doing, what type of cannabis business that you're running or looking to run. I think that'd be really interesting and useful for all of us so that we can kind of speak towards your questions and your experience. I want to jump over, Chris, to you next, to kind of, first of all, as Ted did, introduce yourself, and also introduce the International Cannabis Bar Association. And specifically what I'd love for you to speak about to begin with is what cannabis businesses need to know. Now, there's a lot that they need to know, obviously, but let's start off with the basics that they need to know about banking, investment, and funding laws when it comes to cannabis in the US.
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, thank you all for having me. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Chris Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the International Cannabis Bar Association. We are an international association of over 800 lawyers that serve the business needs of cannabis industry market participants in the US and abroad. Most of our members are here in the United States. I think we have members from about 45 states at this point. So even those unregulated markets are starting to try to learn a little bit more from us about how these markets work in regulated areas and sort of how we can take some of those lessons that we've learned there, import those to some of these emerging jurisdictions. We run a lot of educational programs. So we run probably about 65 hours a year of CLE, so continuing legal education credit. All of our programs are targeted towards attorneys, business attorneys primarily. And so anything from funding and business formation to commercial contracts to anything else. If you are a lawyer and you're interested in learning more about the industry, I encourage you to visit our website at incba.org. And if you're a sophisticated business owner, we find that a lot of our educational programming is very useful for those types of individuals that would like to sort of raise how they're operating in this industry. I myself am also a lawyer. I'm a member of the bar in California and New York. Before I came to the cannabis industry about 6 years ago, I was a securities litigator before I was a legal editor for a large national publication where I focused on finance and banking regulation. One of the things that Ted brought up was the sort of the competition between the legal and the illicit markets. And, that's one of the things that we as an industry have struggled with as we are trying to lay regulations over what is one of the sort of largest existing pools of demand for a product historically, before we've tried to lay this regulatory structure over. One of the things we've tried to do as we are coming up with regulations, as legislators and rule makers are writing these things, is to try to sort of tamp down on that illicit market. Unfortunately, we run into sort of a competing interests there, because we do find that most of the movement along legalization has come from this sort of talk of increased tax rates, increased revenue, having the cannabis industry be driving some of that government revenue that we've sort of started to miss out on in other places. Unfortunately, when we do heavily tax the industry, we do force people back into the illicit market. And so this is sort of a continuing problem that we see across the board in cannabis, around finding that right tax rate, allowing people like Ted to compete with those illicit markets in a manner that sort of continues to reduce the level of that illicit market. And one of the things that we constantly struggle with is sort of putting a number value on that illicit market. And it occurs to me that sort of looking at some of that cyclical activity, would really help in terms of putting a number on sort of what the potential of the industry actually looks like, as opposed to sort of guessing in the dark here with what demand at any one given point sort of is. So going back to your original question, what do you need to know about financing and raising money in the cannabis industry? First of all, there's a lot. The cannabis industry is full of rules and regulations. And so when we're talking about raising money in the cannabis industry, we have to, again, sort of step back from what Ted was talking about and look at the legal industry versus the illicit market. As he mentioned, when you're dealing with the illicit market, obviously you're dealing with a lot of that home grow, some smaller producers, people that don't really, they're not raising the ire of regulators. And so they're not necessarily adhering to all of those regulatory structures. And so you really are competing fundamentally with a different set. So we're going to focus on those individuals that are licensed, that are operating in the sort of the light market, the newly regulated markets, as we call them. I just want to start off with a sort of a very rudimentary analogy. If you sat down with a group of 3 friends and you wanted to play a game of Monopoly, you wouldn't really have to read the rule book. You could sort of look at the board and you could see where the squares were, and you could start rolling the die, and you could move your pieces along the board. But the second that someone sits down at that Monopoly table with a stack of cash and inside out knowledge of the rule book, you're going to go bankrupt, right? And that's the bottom line. And the same thing is true with this industry. And so that brings us to the point of really understanding the rules and regulations of wherever you're operating. And so in the cannabis industry, we're dealing with local rules. So those could be municipal, land use and zoning rules. They could be, if you're in unincorporated areas, they could be county level rules. You have to deal with your state licensing structure, and then you have to deal with the federal prohibition on cannabis, which still exists. So that's the first thing, is that you have to become acquainted with the different regulatory structures that are applicable to you, and sort of how those fit together and how you navigate them. Obviously, that's way too much to go over in sort of one hour. So find someone who knows those rules better than you do, and talk to them a lot. Find someone who understands sort of the local land use and zoning. You need someone who's a local expert, you need someone who's a state expert, and then you need someone who's going to tell you what to look out for on the federal level. The next point that I wanted to talk about, sorry, just looking back in my notes just really quickly, is getting and keeping a bank account. There are right now there are about 500 banks that do bank the industry. This is tracked at a federal level, and so banks that do take money from the cannabis industry have to file suspicious activity reports, SARS reports. And so the federal government does track how many banks bank the cannabis industry. It is legal for banks to bank the cannabis industry. That being said, each one of these banks that offers a bank account to the cannabis industry has to adhere to a set of federal guidance under what's called the FinCEN memo, which outlines sort of a set of directives that those banks must adhere by. What that does is it requires that the banks do due diligence on any individual customer that is taking money for cannabis. This means that those banks are sort of acting as a proxy regulator for those local, state, and federal regulators to make sure that you're not diverting product out of state, to make sure that you're not targeting youth for marketing plans or anything like that, which I'm sure we'll get into later. And so really knowing those rules and knowing what you have to do, first of all, you're not going to get your license if you don't know those rules. And second of all, you're going to lose your bank account, or you're not going to be able to get a bank account in the first place if you're not following those rules, because that bank is going to be checking up on you as well.
And the next thing, one thing to throw in there is credit unions, I've found, have been much more friendly at helping you understand that process than some of the general banks, just to throw it out there.
Sure. Yeah, and there are large federally chartered banks, and then there are sort of local credit unions. A lot of banks that do serve the industry have kind of backed their way in through either purchasing a credit union or forming a credit union at the state level. They still have to know you, and they still have to sort of take an interest in what you're doing and make sure that you are following the rules. And so the really, I think what Ted is getting at is that it's useful to find a bank that's going to work with you and not against you. And so they will have a compliance program. Your bank should tell you how their compliance program works, tell you what is going to flag sort of suspicion in your transactions, and help you navigate that compliance program to make sure that you're staying on the right side of the law and that the bank is not going to sort of get in any trouble with any of their regulators. The next thing we need to talk about are securities laws. So this is not a cannabis-specific area of law. This is a very complex area of law that is applicable to anyone who's raising money. We have federal securities laws. This is all the talk that you may have heard about accredited versus unaccredited investors, public offerings versus private placements. It's again an area that's rife with sort of potholes for the uninformed. So talk to somebody who specializes not just in cannabis regulatory structures, but in securities laws. On top of all of those federal securities laws, we also have state level, what are called blue sky laws, which are basically reiterations of those federal security laws with oftentimes just slight differences that require localized state level knowledge of those laws. The third thing is thinking about how you want to raise your money, right? And so there's a fundamental question of debt versus equity. The very simple way to describe it is that if you are looking for money and you're looking to give away equity, you're giving away some of your upside returns in the future, right? You're giving away some of that equity benefit you would have in the future if your company takes off. On the other hand, if your company goes bankrupt, you're not going to necessarily have to pay back all of that. Debt is the opposite. You give away a certain amount of money. You will always have to pay that back if you're issuing debt, but then you don't give away any of your upside on the back end. So you really, as an individual and as a business person, think about whether you want to give away debt or equity or some combination of the two. It doesn't have to be incredibly complex. I think that up on the Meta website, there is a copy of a SAFE, a simple agreement for equity, which is I think it's only about a 2-page agreement. It was drafted by a few of our members for the equity applicant sort of pool to create a sort of an easily understandable way for some smaller companies to raise money through equity. But those can become very, very complex depending on who your counterparty is there. The last thing that you should think about are the consequences of raising money in the cannabis industry and sort of coming into this industry to begin with. We don't have access to all of the tools that traditional businesses have. So on the back end, let's say that some of those investments go bad, we do not have access to bankruptcy courts, for instance. And so if your creditor is trying to reorganize your debt, we don't have things like the automatic stay in bankruptcy court to allow for the easy sort of to facilitate the reallocation of that capital. What this means for businesses is that if you default on a debt payment, your creditor can really come after you, and they can sort of, a single creditor, if you have a creditor that you don't get along well with, they can really mess with your business, and you don't have some of those traditional protections that would come along with bankruptcy. So you really need to be careful. You have to go through state level insolvency laws instead. And then of course there can be personal consequences. I, for one, I run this bar association. And so when I send emails in my tagline, it says the International Cannabis Bar Association. I don't sell flower. I don't have a bank account that houses money that comes directly from cannabis producers. I still had trouble getting a personal mortgage for my home this past year. And so there are consequences that are unrelated to the cannabis industry itself that, again, once you start entering into that banking system, you become known as a cannabis industry participant that could raise red flags. So now that I've scared you all to death, I think we can probably move on to some of the more fun aspects of it. And so I'm going to throw it back to you, Elena, and we can move on from that, and I'll answer more questions as they come along.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for scaring everyone. I think really the main takeaway here is that if you're starting a cannabis business, you need to find someone like Chris and consult. Super important. Jim, I'm going to move over to you next. If you can tell us a little bit, first of all, about Oraleaf HR. Oraleaf is our sponsor for this webinar. So it'd be great if you can tell us, about what you're doing, and then dig into the issues that cannabis businesses are facing when it comes to recruiting well-trained, reliable employees, which is, of course, something that all businesses need to deal with, but it's a little bit different in this space.
Yeah, my name is Jim Valenzuela. Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate everyone here. It's really interesting. I think that in this space, Oraleaf HR, first of all, is a full-service HR company. So we do everything. We do the payroll, we do the insurances, we do the workers' comp, we do everything. I got introduced to this space. We offer legal advice. We do a lot of different things from the HR standpoint. I got into this space because I was introduced to it in 2014 when I was running a previous company that I had that I sold to eventually to a Paychex company. We had clients in the Denver marketplace. Unbeknownst to me as a CEO, I didn't know that they were in the cannabis space. And at that time, I had a bank account. One of our sponsor banks through a private equity fund was, U.S. Bank. When I found out we had some cannabis clients, of course I had to tell them, and I had the unfortunate duty of telling them that I could no longer run them anymore. And these were very good clients of ours, and it's very frustrating to me. So after I sold my company to Paychex, I had, obviously had a contract and a non-compete, but I was looking at where I could get back into the space and do something that I really wanted to do, that was needed in a vertical that was really, really interesting and taking off, but needed the services. And that's when I was looking at the cannabis marketplace for a while. And the reason I look at it as being one where, everyone wants to do the right thing. The government doesn't allow you sometimes to do the right thing, the way they're putting the barriers in front. So I think that you should, they want your taxes, they want all these things, but they're making it very difficult for you with the banking laws and everything else. But they want you to still be in compliance with their laws, with their employee laws, with their state laws and everything else. And so I thought this was a great opportunity for me to help on the employee side and on the employer side, filing your taxes and making sure your employees have the right benefits and the things that make you competitive, because in this space, everyone knows it. It's a fast growing space, and the competitive nature of getting employees is really getting difficult. And so I think the employees deserve to have the same thing, have direct deposits. That's why I have a, like Chris is speaking about getting a bank account. Yes, I have a bank account with a marijuana related bank. So I'm a tier 2 account because I take cannabis dollars from my clients, but I do that because I want to be able to offer the full line of services, and I want to be very upfront with my clients and everyone that I am doing this specifically, and I want to be able to offer you all these services, and I'm not going to come back like I did back in 2014 and tell you, I'm sorry, I can't run you any longer. My bank is in the business. This is what we do. So I think when you get back to the recruiting and everyone else, I think it's that stuff and training them. When you start thinking about the recruitment of the quality individuals that you were trying to attract to your company, having all the benefits, the ability to attract them, to offer, upgrade paths in the business that's just growing so fast. It's all those pieces together to get them and attract them. But everyone also forgets that when you have a high turnover business, as we've seen in the past, that really is just money that goes out the door, because the training of individuals takes on an enormous amount of time, because how long does it take that employee to get productive? And so when you get the churn in the business and they learn something that you find that they're critical, and then they leave to another company that maybe is offering a little bit more money or whatever, you're losing out. Now you got to retrain, you got to do all those pieces of it too, to do a new employee, to bring them on board. So those are the kind of things that we look at, and we try to help out with our tools and with our network of individuals that we've done. And I just tap into my resources again. And, I'm an ex-CPA by trade. And, like Ted saying, he was with McKinsey back in the day. Ted, there was actually a firm called Arthur Anderson and Company that I was a CPA with. And, this is where I came from. I did a number of entrepreneurial deals throughout my career, some of which were high tech and the software business. And so I actually took a company public once as a CFO and in the tech business. And this is really akin to the same space. In fast growing, hyper growth is interesting to me, because it leads you to you got to have the right infrastructure in place to grow. Otherwise, you're just going to step on yourself and make errors. And the compliance of all these things really comes to the forefront, because when you're growing clients are growing 100% a year. Here in Arizona, they're growing 100% a year. In other states, they're growing the same way. As they continue on, as you see the growth and the acquisitions, the mergers and acquisitions going on, you're seeing that going on. So those are the things that we work on, and those are the things that I see going on in the space. But I think the recruiting and the retention is really critical at this point.
Thanks for that, Jim. I think it's really important, really, for anyone running a business, all of these issues, but especially in this space. I think these are the issues, and this kind of crosses over to what you were talking about as well, Chris, of the issues that business owners really just want to put to the side, make sure that they're dealt with, so that they can get on with running the business and building the business.
I'll just share a super short story that I think makes kind of emphasizes how important what Jim is describing is. But I am super proud that in my 5 years, I've never missed payroll, even when I was, for a couple of those years, bootstrapping the business by just selling weed. And so always had to sell more weed to make payroll, basically. And even then I made it. And a couple of weeks ago, one of their payroll providers decided, the day before payroll, that they decided we were no longer an ancillary company because I have a 2-entity structure with an ancillary and a plant touching, and I do different payroll for different things. But the payroll for the ancillary business, that group was like, we're not running your payroll. And I was like, what? How can you not let me know more than 1 day in advance? And it became this big fire that became the focus for the next 2 days of just, calling the founders of those other companies, getting them to run our payroll, getting a expedited process to get them to re-review us. And I think being upfront with your service providers about what you're doing gives you the benefit of avoiding those sort of fire drills. At the same time, you don't always have the benefit to do that. But now, as the industry has gotten more and more regulated and more mature, there are service providers for, most of these key things, and it can help you avoid those sort of fires. And it matters, and you don't want to end up not paying your people. So use somebody like Jim for sure.
Well, yes, Ted, it's because, that's how unfortunately, those are the phone calls that I get, are saying, I just found out, or my bank will call me and tell me one of my clients just got terminated. And those are tough because, it's a frustrating situation because, as everyone you'd rather be proactive than reactionary and do it on your own time. Like you said, the day before payroll is difficult. And so when you can do it in a scheduled fashion, it makes more sense, obviously. So that's where the key piece is there. And, they don't give you a whole lot of time, like you said.
Yeah, one of the things that we often recommend is trying to find backups for those service providers. And so if you are dealing with somebody, if you're going into a bank, you can never lie to your bank about what you're doing. And so don't be dishonest about it. If they don't ask you questions that are direct, sort of in your industry, you can decide about how much you'd like to disclose to your bank. If you are being honest with them. And so if they don't ask you what industry you're in, and they don't ask you what you do sort of on a day-to-day basis, you can answer those questions directly. But, like Jim and Ted are saying, if you answer them honestly, at least you won't get the rug pulled out from underneath you. And then like I said, we always recommend that people have backups for those types of providers. And so if you do get pulled from your payroll or from your bank account or from your payment processor, you're not scrambling and not able to take any payments for 3 days or not able to run your payroll for 2 weeks and sort of force your employees into a tough situation.
And I had one question for you, Jim, which is like on a slightly different subject, but on the hiring side. So my company is a mixture of kind of tech, like startup, Y Combinator type people, engineers, and old school cannabis experienced folks on our supply chain fulfillment side. And I feel like there's a lot of tools out there to hire people into into tech or into operations and standard industries. But there are a lot of specialized skills for people with cannabis experience that companies like mine that are growing quickly need to find good talent for. And a lot of those people that have those skill sets, like having bought weed for 10 years, and so you can trust them to buy weed for you, don't have LinkedIns, they
Right.
don't have a angel list. So
Right.
How would you advise somebody who's trying to find good people with industry experience to find them and get that top of funnel going?
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, Ted, because I think it gets to the stigma that's, we're seeing it going away, right? It's no longer what it used to be, let's just say even 12, 24, 36 months ago. But you're still seeing it. I know from my perspective, folks that I know and people that call me up, whether they're on the financial executives or wherever, we're seeing a lot more folks wanting to enter the space, right? And we're seeing a whole new generation of folks coming into the space. But I also think that from your perspective, yeah, they don't have the LinkedIn space, but there's other boards out there that we actually go out to, and we do a whole piece of it where we try to find the technology folks out there. And there are technologies out there and platforms out there where you can actually go post, and you have a myriad of them out there. It's a matter of getting the right job description and what you're really looking for. And Ted, exactly what the specs of that job are and what the talent, let's just say whether it's some kind of a technical skill set that they need, whether it's a language or whatever it is, you can go get those. And I think you're going to be able to find a lot more employees in that space now than you would have, 24 months ago. But I do think there are special boards for that stuff out there. And if you go to the technology boards, and I think you'll start seeing some of those people pop into these spaces now. You may not see them in LinkedIn, but there's other boards out there these guys, these technical folks hang out in. We know that.
And then just one other sort of point about I hate to bring us back to the regulatory side, but again, you have to be very familiar with what your state requires from you as a business owner. And so in certain states, we have trouble with people that have felony histories. in the drug industry, and certain states look very favorably on it, right? And so we're having this sort of evolving discussion around the drug war, the failed drug war, as many people would put it, and sort of the consequences that should come out of some of those criminal actions from the government historically, and whether or not that affects who you can hire. So again, just be careful that you're adhering to your state level regulations.
Right. It's just compliance on every level is what, unfortunately, what you got to keep up with. But it's like Chris says, it's at the state, federal, state, local levels.
And that level, Chris, or on that topic of like making sure they passed the background checks and everything. Also, for business partners, double check that they know that even if they've committed something when they were a teenager, it will be found, because the FBI background check will find it. Because that can set you back by half a year on a license application sometimes. May have happened to me.
Yeah. And we see this less these days, which I'm really happy to see as lawyer in the room, where, you know, like you're saying, Jim, the industry has evolved a lot in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, you saw a lot more of those handshake deals where I found a guy, he's great, you know, we get along so well, we click, and I think we're gonna start the next new great business. And you're like, okay, what's his last name? I'm not sure, I forgot to ask him. You know, it's like, okay, know who your business partners are, understand what their history has been, understand what they're bringing to the table, including some of that baggage. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. It's okay. We'll forgive you for bringing the regulatory conversation back, because it's just, you know, so central here. So just before we move on to you, Lisa, I want to kind of add a reminder to all of our viewers. This is the time to start adding questions. Let's get them stacked up a little bit so that we can get to those when we're getting to the Q&A section in a few minutes. Lisa, I want to turn over you. First of all, if you can tell us a bit about the Cannabis Marketing Association. I'm pretty sure this is going to be relevant for everyone who's tuning in today, and then specifically to talk about what sort of marketing barriers cannabis businesses are facing at the moment, and how they can overcome them.
Yes, that is the question of the year for sure. And I don't think we have enough time to cover it, but I will do my best. So nice to meet you all. I'm Lisa. I'm the founder and CEO of the Cannabis Marketing Association. I refer to myself as a recovering cannabis CMO. I was the CMO of a brand out here in Colorado back in 2014, 2015. And having come from a tech and nonprofit marketing background, my marketing toolkit that I knew in that space, I tried to apply in cannabis, and it just did not work. Some of the marketing fundamentals are there, but when it comes to how you market cannabis, the channels available to you, what you're allowed to do, and some of the things you might take for granted, it's very, very different in this space. And I will also ring the regulatory alarm here in the sense that marketing has not escaped that at all. So Cannabis Marketing Association, we are a membership-based organization, and we're focused on education and best practices for marketers in the space. I founded it about 6 years ago now, when I recognized there was no guidance and no direction for this. And when you have a budget and pressure to, show ROI to your boss, there's a lot to learn and unpack, even if you think you know marketing. So we help connect the industry, service providers in marketing, those agencies who do marketing, PR, brands and retailers themselves we work with most significantly, and then service providers in that ancillary marketing space, whether it's data or designers or software that kind of touches the cannabis marketing landscape. So we help connect them with each other, work on establishing best practices and sharing information and data to really help, rising tide raises all ships in this industry for sure at this point. So, and that being said, we're also an ancillary business. We don't touch, sell, or distribute cannabis whatsoever. And it took me a year to get a bank account, and I was walked out of literally dozens of establishments in Colorado. So when Chris says find a backup provider, that might mean every single provider but that is real. And I hope that does change, but very much so consider that and recognize it's also going to take a lot of time. It's not as simple as just, oh, okay, I know this other person. It's walking them through that and really having time on your side in some sense. So if you've thought about when to start in cannabis, start early, because you will actually start way later than you think. We delayed our launch, I'm not kidding, almost a year and a half. by the time it took where we had all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed. And I think we went fast to some extent. So marketing in this space, the first thing I think that's most important is 280E, which I think we lightly touched on. But 280E is the tax code, and I'm not a lawyer or a tax expert, so take this for what it's worth. But effectively, the IRS says if you're selling an illicit substance, you are not a legitimate business, and therefore you cannot deduct business expenses. So that's a very high level version of it, but I encourage you to look it up. But marketing can fall into that category. So in CPG, any other industry where you say, oh, okay, marketing's an investment, I can put these sums of money into these different campaigns and try things. In cannabis, it's not so much because your CEO, your CFO is not able to deduct that expense. So the budgets are smaller, the pressure to show ROI is a lot bigger, and you're going to be learning a bit more about accounting than you might have necessarily realized in another industry. So 280E absolutely impacts businesses, but marketers aren't exempt from that. So definitely look more into that if you have not heard of 280E. That being said, also, because cannabis is still unlawful at the federal level, when you're marketing it, that's effectively, the step before selling. So there is a lot of regulatory difference at the local, state, and regional level as far as what you're allowed to do and what audiences you're allowed to market to. So it's roughly 70% of the audience has to be over the age of 21. That number changes a little bit based on where you are. But if you're going to say, hey, I want to put this ad into this magazine, that magazine needs to be able to prove this is their audience demographic in order for it to be compliant. They can, even if they meet it, they can still turn it down for whatever reasons, political, fair, or legitimate. They can still say, no, we don't really want your money. It's going to upset too many other people. And then you also have to be careful about what's in the creative. There are certain states where you have to actually run your ads through a person in the government and get them approved. Nevada is one example. You have to submit your ads to the Department of Revenue there and get them approved before you can actually run that. Don't know of really any other industries where that's the case. And then you have to be careful what you show in them. Some places you can't have a leaf or a green cross. There are certain words you can or can't use. So to reiterate what Chris said, you need to know the laws and you need to know them through and through. And this is not just the C-suite, it's your whole marketing team. It's your social media managers. It's folks who may not be your typical legal or compliance experts and who might look at that legal jargon and like their head explodes, but they have to know. And the sanctions for violating the marketing regulations aren't small. They can be as extreme as getting your business shut down. And obviously, if you think about it, the counter argument is that we don't want this information in the hands of children. So if there's anything that would be even perceived as crossing that line, they're very, very strict about it. And it's just something to take into consideration. So that being said, retailers also operate independently. So when it comes to running marketing campaigns, it's not just like, oh, hey, use this coupon code and at checkout, we'll be able to track, I put this coupon code in these channels and now we can just very simply track, the ROI on this campaign. That's not the case. Retailers are independent. And even though we have online ordering in these online systems, it's not a typical e-commerce product where you go all the way through checkout there and are selling everything online. You still have to go to the store. You still have to get that purchase. And again, each state is different. Depending on their law, their delivery and whatnot. So you are thinking about marketing like everything else that everyone has mentioned on a local basis, a state basis, and then, that broader country basis, depending on where you operate in, whether you are a brand or in the ancillary space. And then lastly, social media. So we can't advertise on social media. In theory, you would think, oh, I can run a Facebook ad for this product and target, 50 plus in Denver, Colorado, and you can't. You can't do it on Facebook, you can't do it on Instagram, you can't do it on Google. And given how much those companies control as far as, our attention, it's a real shame as far as what cannabis business owners are up against. In addition to that, Facebook, for example, has implemented shadow bans. So for a while, if you typed in Cannabis Marketing Association into the search bar on Facebook, it would say no search results found. And when we even tried to get our handle, it said, we don't use those words. Like I forget the exact language, but it was like, you can't have @Canna whatever, because that word is not something that Facebook allows. So unless you had a direct link to our Facebook page, you couldn't even search it and find it. And I can't really emphasize that enough when you're marketing, how much we take that for granted if you're doing any other product. And then lastly, even if you have just organic content, so no paid ads, just posting on your Instagram wall, Facebook wall, you cannot sell cannabis. You can't allude to it. You can't post prices. You can't post discounts, and anything that might be on that. Marketing borders sales. That's how it goes. Anything that might even be on that fringe that Facebook, Instagram, and these platforms might determine is crossing the line, they can and will not only shut down your account, but delete it without warning and with no way to contact them and get your account reinstated. Even if you are a legal, legitimate, compliant business and you've spent years and time and energy and employees to build that following. And that can be very, very devastating. I spend my job talking to disheartened marketers every day. And they call me also frantic, like, hey, my Instagram account got shut down. Who do you know at Instagram that I can talk to? Because I've just been sent into some nebulous funnel where no human is ever going to respond. And now my boss is freaking out at me. So marketing, to just sound the alarm again, but just to reemphasize what everyone has said, also very complex. There's a lot of nuance in understanding it. And all those channels we take for granted, still, if you think about it, it is marketing a federally unlawful product, an illicit substance. So platforms, publishers, they do not have to work with you, and they have legitimate basis to turn you away and take down what you've built up. So it's important to learn. And shamelessly, that's why I built this community, because I ran into those things, and it's not fair to these business owners who are already dealing with so much that even when you're doing things right, so to speak, you have to just, again, have the time, energy, and bandwidth to deal with all of that. So that's the long and short of cannabis marketing. And happy to talk about it more, but you need to know it before you get into it.
Yeah, there's a few things that are really interesting about sort of what you were saying, Lisa, and the marketing rules and regulations, especially here in California. So I sit in Oakland, are just, they are a maze. It is difficult to figure out. One example is, for instance, with branded merchandise. If you are a license holder in California and you have branded merchandise, there are a bunch of regulations about who can sell that branded merchandise. And so the rules actually say that only the license holder can sell it. And so if you have a license for cultivation and you would like the retailer, the dispensary that sells your flower to also sell your branded merchandise, currently under the letter of the law, that is impermissible. And so the only shirt that they would be able to sell at that retailer would be the shirt of the retailer itself, right? We are having a large discussion on our forum right now about sort of whether this is what they intended, whether or not there are ways around this, and really people are trying to unwind these answers. And so that marketing is a morass of sort of rules and regulations. Another example is the white labeling. So again, here in California, there was a prohibition on white labeling under a certain set of regulations for quite a while. And so if you're a white labeler, if you wanted to create a brand and sell under someone else's license, so if you just wanted to own the brand and then you wanted to license the brand out to a cultivator that would then brand your merchandise with your brand, you used to be able to do that without a license. And now in California, you need to own a license. And so you have to be very careful about how you do this marketing stuff. Again, it all has to reference back to those sets of regulations.
And I think there's two things here that are worth touching on. One is yes, these rules are tricky and they're complicated, but if it was easy, then there wouldn't be a way for you, everyone would do it, and then it would be hard. And so the fact that there are these rules mean that if you understand them, you can actually get an edge based on your business's use of the rules. So, I have an ancillary company. I also have a plant touching company. We have a brand, our own brand that we can advertise for. For Flower Company, and we have house products that are insane prices, like $59 ounces and $10 cartridges and $10 grams of extract, really best prices you could get. Because we have the brand, we can advertise differently for our brand than we can for our tech platform. Like the rules are different, as long as that's what we're advertising for, not the other thing. And so like that's an example of where knowing that meant we could talk about price when other people couldn't advertise price outside of the platform, because we're not advertising price for our platform, we're advertising price for our brand. And that's like that, those types of rules matter differently at different periods of time in the industry's development. But so I'm not saying like that's necessarily the rule right now, but just it's useful to understand the rules, because if you are licensed and other people aren't, or you choose to develop your product in a certain way, you can have an edge over other people just based on your understanding of the rules. I think another part of it though is given, Chris talking about this rule, is like being an operator, just existing as a human, you break laws you don't even know you break. Existing as a cannabis operator, you break there. It's hard to keep up with all the rules. And sometimes the rules are in conflict, like local bans on delivery versus state rules saying it should be everywhere. And lawyers will battle it out in court. But at the end of the day, you're not waiting for the perfect answer. You're operating your company. And so I think as a business owner, you need to understand what laws to prioritize, because there's some rules you have to follow all the time, like metric, make sure your sits there, taxes, make sure people are paid their money. But there are other rules that, like, when they're in conflict, you have to make choices and judgment calls and prioritize. Because, like, are you going to prioritize getting this, the apparel stuff to be perfect, or are you going to prioritize understanding your cash flow and having like your accounting really solid so that you exist in 2 years and they have something to try to fine you for? So I like, while Chris and Lisa are talking about these challenges of regulation, I just want to put a little bit of context as an operator that like people don't necessarily always operate perfectly, and it doesn't mean that they get destroyed for it. There's some judgment calls you have to have, and just understand how to prioritize your rules.
I think that's fair said, and I think that emphasizes what Jim does as far as making sure you've hired and trained good quality employees who you can trust to say, hey, my marketing team knows this and has this covered and is going to make the best judgment calls on behalf of my brand. So that the business owners can really focus on those things you mentioned and staying afloat. Because the issue is when folks are completely blindsided and they put something out that is a total, at least from the marketing side, maybe they put out an ad or something that is just totally not compliant. And it's like, if you read the rules, you would have seen that. And it, you can't take that back. So I appreciate that perspective from the brand side.
I think Ted's right with respect to that, and I think what we all see is, sooner or later it is a business, and you're going to be challenged, and you're going to be encountered with business decisions on a daily basis. And like Ted says, some of them are going to be clear cut, some of them are not going to be. They're going to be in that gray area. Some are going to be, right away, right? But that's part of running any business, and you've got to make those decisions, and that's the challenge of it as the leader and the CEO of a company. You've got to be able to make those decisions and know which one's right for the company as a whole, and for you as a person and your employees.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right there, Jim. And it's a great segue into our first question here from the audience. We'll do, probably about another 5 or 6 minutes to wrap up here, coming up to the end of the hour. So we have a question here from Jody for you, Jim. For new college grads looking to get into the cannabis industry, what are some valuable skills they should promote on their resume?
I think that really it depends on what specifically the area they're looking for. But I look at this cannabis space, it's just like it's a lot of, I see two things here, and then let me just real quickly answer it. I see a lot of people wanting to get into the cannabis space, and we've seen it because it's hot right now, right? It's the keyword. Cannabis is very sexy, but then they get into it and they go like, wait a second, this is not what I thought it was. This is still, and I said, well, yeah, it's still a business. And you have to perform, you have to do these. So you got metrics, you got everything, right? You got to set up, you got productivity, all these things you still have to do. So I think from a standpoint of what you want to get into the cannabis, what can you bring to the cannabis space? What is your expertise? What did you study? What did you do? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it accounting? Is it supply chain analysis? Is it technology? Because technology sooner or later is good. As Ted will tell you, there's a component to it and everything. Whether it is, there's so many ancillary parts of the cannabis space, whether it's some compliance technology or whatever it is, ancillary or within the cannabis space, there's a ton of opportunities when you think about it, because everything touches it sooner or later. Whether it's, you got insurance companies that are now, looking at this stuff, right? So how are they going to? You got the bank and you got insurance. So there's a ton of ways to get into the cannabis space. It's how you want to get into it. It's sort of like what I decided. I want to get into it on the ancillary level, doing what I do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities to that question to sort of legal practice in general. And so you find some attorneys saying, oh, I'm a cannabis attorney. And when people say that to me, I sort of wonder, okay, so what does that mean? What does it mean when you're a cannabis attorney? If you say you're a cannabis attorney generally, then maybe that means that you're a regulatory compliance attorney and you know the cannabis rules and regulations in California very, very well. Maybe it means you're a real estate attorney or a finance attorney or a securities attorney, or maybe you work on small business issues. And what the problem is that people need to come into the industry with a fulsome background of what their wheelhouse is, right? Like, you can't come into the cannabis attorney and be a securities attorney for cannabis companies without being a securities attorney in the first place, right? You can't come into the cannabis industry and say, I want to do marketing in the cannabis industry, unless you have a solid foundation in marketing, right? And so if you want to come into the cannabis industry and you want to work in a marketing department in the cannabis industry, become a good marketer, right? Have those baseline set of skills. And then when you come into the industry, then you go to Lisa and you say, okay, what's unique about this industry? Like, what do I need to lay on top of my existing knowledge around marketing? Okay, what are the rules and regulations that I need to read that are different than other industries? What are the lessons that I can bring in from that baseline set of knowledge to this industry that's going to help this company that maybe they don't have from more a traditional set? And so it's less about wanting to get into the cannabis industry and finding what speaks to you within any business, like Jim was saying, running with that and getting that solid foundation, and then putting like that little extra bit of cannabis over top of it. And that's how you're going to find success here.
All right, I think we have time. Oh, sorry, go on, Tim.
I would just layer one last thing in there, which is just like, for someone coming right out of school, the two traits I would try to illustrate through your background, your stories during interviews are being like nimble, like not freaking out when circumstances are changing that you're dealing with, and being able to continue to problem solve and change your path and then execute on something, because we frequently need to change what we're doing and adopt new kind of strategies. So being nimble is one. And then also, because of the pace that the industry is developing and how competitive it is, just being very like ferocious is the word I would use, which is like a combination of working really hard, like having relentlessness, but also urgency in the work you do. Because I think if you're ferocious but nimble, you're going to do well in this kind of quickly developing environment and make your boss's life easier, which is going to be what makes them happy.
Absolutely. Everyone go and put ferocious and nimble on your LinkedIn profiles right now. I love that. All right, I want us to fit in one more quick question here. I think, Chris, I'll ask you to start off in this one from Jennifer. Since CBD is operating in a gray area, will making it a dietary supplement force everyone to switch over to hemp terminology so the little guys do not have to submit clinical trials to the FDA? If you can answer that in like 30 seconds, that would be awesome.
We got it, 30 seconds. The long and the short of it is that CBD is operating in an area of reduced enforcement. And so I wouldn't say that it's a gray area, because the rules are very clear. How you make your way through the FDA is clear. It's very complicated, but the rules are there. And so what we're dealing with is sort of the FDA not enforcing some of their regulations. Just adopting the hemp terminology for CBD isn't going to help, because fundamentally the hemp market and the psychoactive cannabis market are two separate markets. And so in the United States, under the 2018 Farm Bill, Psychoactive cannabis is over 0.3% THC. Hemp is under 0.3%. There's a little bit of a sort of a negligence standard in there that gives you a little bit of flux in there, but if you're testing hot for a hemp crop, it becomes psychoactive cannabis. And that prevents you from putting your product into certain commerce streams. And so if you're producing hemp and you're having CBD come out of your hemp products, that's not really, you know, the sort of the semantics game that you're playing. It's really about what crop it's coming from, how you're producing it, and how you're applying for the FDA. I think that there's going to be a lot of clarity coming out of those rules over the next 6 months or so. And we actually have a 3-hour set of sessions that are going to be released on the 15th of this month. So I think next Wednesday, that are hemp 101, 201, and 301 courses. And so if you do want to figure out sort of what the federal agencies are that deal with hemp production, of course, on the production side, there is the USDA. They have a sort of a federal level set of minimum standards. There's the USDA rule. Some states have adopted that USDA rule. States can go up from that sort of baseline floor level of regulations. And then, of course, when you're talking about the actual retail side, you move over to the FDA. So, again, it's sort of a regulatory morass. There are rules. There's some non-enforcement there. We've seen some enforcement letters come out from the FDA. We haven't seen them really crack down on anything. But again, I wouldn't really call it a legal gray area. I would more call it sort of an area of non-enforcement. And we're waiting for them to sort of pick that up and figure out what they want to do with it. Because I think it was Jim that mentioned earlier that there are areas here that
Did he freeze for everybody?
Yeah, looks like it. All right, so I guess we're going to have to wrap up without Chris there. I thought it was me that was frozen for a second there. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone that's listening in at the moment. And also, Chris is back. We have a better version of Chris, a live version.
Sorry, I think I got kicked out.
You froze. It's okay. I kicked out the frozen version. Thanks so much for clarifying that for us. I think there's, really so much misinformation in the space in general, but specifically when it comes to CBD and hemp. So that's really important. So we're going to wrap up. Again, thanks all for joining us. Thank you especially to Jim and Orly for sponsoring this. In the comments here, there's a whole lot of resources when it comes to HR that you can click on, have a look, and feel free to get in touch with any of us. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can shoot me an email, and I'll put you in touch with any of the panelists here. And we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.